She meant well. I keep telling myself that. She meant well, and she moved everything. I was 28 hours out of a grueling 6-hour L4, L5 spinal fusion surgery. My body a fragile architecture of titanium screws, bone grafts, and dissolving sutures, floating in a synthetic chemical ocean of dilaudid and heavy muscle relaxers. When I first heard the sound of glass clinking, it was a rhythmic, delicate sound, the kind of noise that belongs in a high-end boutique, not in the strictly utilitarian, obsessively optimized kitchen of a 38-year-old director of global supply chain logistics. I opened my eyes, the heavy lids fighting against the narcotic fog, and stared at the ceiling of my first-floor master bedroom. The ceiling fan was off. I always kept it on low. The blackout curtains, which I had specifically instructed to be drawn tight to prevent the brutal July sun from baking the room, were thrown wide open, blinding me with a harsh, unforgiving glare. I tried to shift my weight, a sharp electric agony shooting down my sciatic nerve, a violent reminder that I was essentially a prisoner in my own body, trapped in a rigid, custom-molded thoracic lumbar sacral orthosis brace that clamped around my torso like a medieval torture device. The clinking continued. Then came the smell. Bleach. Heavy, industrial, eye-watering bleach, masking the faint, comforting scent of the lavender and cedarwood diffusers I had carefully placed around the house. I forced myself to roll, executing the log roll maneuver the physical therapist had drilled into me before discharge, every millimeter of movement a negotiation with screaming nerve endings. I grabbed the walker positioned by the bed, my knuckles turning white as I hauled my dead weight upward. I shuffled to the bedroom door, pushing it open with a trembling hand, and looked down the hallway toward the kitchen. The breath left my lungs in a single ragged gasp. My home, my meticulously engineered sanctuary, was gone. The kitchen island, usually a pristine expanse of quartz reserved only for active meal prep, was covered in a chaotic array of wicker baskets, decorative ceramic roosters, and glass apothecary jars filled with God knows what. The cabinet doors were wide open, revealing a horrifying reorganization. My spices, previously arranged by a strict alphanumeric system based on frequency of use and flavor profile, were now dumped into identical, unmarked glass vials, organized purely by color. The heavy cast-iron skillets, which lived in the reinforced bottom drawers for ergonomic access, were now precariously stacked on the highest shelf. And standing in the center of this devastation, wearing a crisp floral apron and holding a clipboard with a serene, self-satisfied smile, was Eleanor. She turned, saw me leaning heavily on the walker, and beamed, her eyes sparkling with the kind of toxic, performative generosity that demands immediate and total gratitude. "Oh, sweetie, you're awake," she cooed, her voice dripping with artificial honey. "Don't you worry about a thing. I know you've been letting things slip around here with your back issues, so I'm just getting everything organized. I'm giving you a fresh start." I stared at her, the sheer audacity of the violation paralyzing me more effectively than the spinal block. Let me back up. I need to explain how we got here, how a supposedly temporary medical recovery arrangement devolved into a psychological siege, and how I methodically dismantled a woman's entire social and familial reality without ever raising my voice. My name is immaterial, but my profession is not. For 16 years, I have worked in the highest echelons of corporate logistics, currently serving as the Senior Director of Supply Chain and Operations for a massive multinational medical device conglomerate. My entire life, my entire brain, is wired for efficiency, optimization, and the ruthless elimination of friction. I manage billion-dollar inventories, coordinate international shipping routes across volatile geopolitical borders, and design warehouse ecosystems where a single misplaced pallet can cost millions. My home was the ultimate expression of that control. It wasn't just clean, it was engineered. Every object had a designated coordinate, every closet was a masterclass in spatial economy, every routine was streamlined to allow me and my husband David, a 40-year-old structural engineer, to manage our demanding careers and our 7-year-old twins, Leo and Maya, with maximum peace and minimal chaos. And then there was Eleanor. Eleanor is David's mother, a 62-year-old retired real estate broker who has spent her entire life weaponizing the concept of help. To the outside world, Eleanor is a saint, a tireless volunteer, a woman who will show up at your door with a casserole before you even know you're hungry. But her generosity has always been a Trojan horse. It is never about easing your burden. It is entirely about establishing dominance, crossing boundaries under the impenetrable shield of maternal care, and creating a ledger of unspoken debts that she can call upon whenever she requires compliance. When David and I were planning our wedding 12 years ago, Eleanor helped by secretly canceling the caterer I had spent months vetting and replacing them with a friend of hers who served dry chicken and warm white wine, claiming she was just trying to save us money, though she never offered to pay the difference. When the twins were born, she helped by arriving at the hospital unannounced, taking the babies from my exhausted arms and refusing to hand them back to me for 2 hours, telling the nurses, "The mother is just too hysterical right now." I had spent a decade carefully managing her, keeping her at arm's length, establishing ironclad boundaries that she constantly tested like a velociraptor probing a newly electrified fence. But then my L4 and L5 vertebrae collapsed. Years of high-stress travel, carrying heavy presentation equipment, and a genetic predisposition to degenerative disc disease culminated in a catastrophic rupture that left me dragging my left leg and and weeping in pain on the floor of an airport lounge in Frankfurt. The surgery wasn't optional. It was an emergency. It required a massive incision, the removal of the herniated disc material, the insertion of a titanium cage, and a bone graft to fuse the spine together. The recovery protocol was draconian. No bending, no lifting anything over 5 pounds, no twisting, and no driving for at least 6 weeks. I was going to be completely dependent, a terrifying prospect for someone whose entire identity was built on hypercompetence. The timing could not have been worse. David was the lead engineer on a massive infrastructure project in Dubai, a contract his firm had been chasing for 3 years. If he backed out to care for me, his career would suffer a massive, potentially unrecoverable blow. We agonized over the decision, running the numbers, looking at hiring a full-time private nurse, considering flying my own mother in from Seattle, but she was undergoing chemotherapy for breast cancer and couldn't travel. That was when Eleanor swooped in. She called David in tears, playing the devoted matriarch, insisting that it was her absolute duty to move into our guest room and take care of the twins, the house, and me. Family takes care of family, David, she had said, her voice echoing through the speakerphone in my home office. You go to Dubai and build that bridge. I will take care of your wife and your home as if they were my own. That was the phrase that should have triggered every alarm bell in my head, as if they were my own. But the pain was blinding, the surgical date was looming, and I was too exhausted to fight. I foolishly believed that the gravity of the medical situation would force her to behave, that even Eleanor wouldn't dare play her manipulative games when I was literally cut open and vulnerable. I was wrong. The takeover began the moment David's flight to Dubai took off, precisely 12 hours before my scheduled discharge from Memorial Hospital. When the medical transport van dropped me off at my front door, I was already in a state of profound distress, the journey over every pothole sending shockwaves of agony through my fused spine. Eleanor opened the door, not with a wheelchair or a helping hand, but with a camera phone, snapping a picture of me looking pale, bloated, and defeated in my brace. For the family group chat, she chirped brightly, ignoring my weak protest. I managed to drag myself into the bedroom, collapsing onto the mattress, desperate for sleep and the next dose of oxycodone. When I woke up that first night, disoriented and in severe pain, I reached blindly for the bedside table where I had meticulously arranged my medications, a bottle of water, and a small flashlight. My hand hit empty air. I fumbled in the dark, panic rising, my fingers scraping against unfamiliar textures. A doily, a stack of heavy hardcover books, a decorative ceramic bowl. My medication organizer, the lifeline keeping me from screaming in agony, was gone. I had to use my phone to call Eleanor's cell, listening to it ring in the guest room for 5 excruciating minutes before she finally answered, sounding groggy and annoyed. Eleanor, where are my pills? I gasped. Oh, sweetie, she sighed, the condescension thick in the dark. I put them in the master bathroom medicine cabinet. I didn't want the twins coming in and accidentally getting into them. We have to think of the children. The twins knew never to enter our room without knocking, and the pill organizer was childproof, but she had moved them to a room I physically could not walk to without my walker and a massive expenditure of agonizing effort. Bring them to me, now, I demanded. She did, but not without a heavy sigh and a muttered comment about how some people just don't appreciate a little foresight. That was just the beginning. By day 3, the illusion of help had completely evaporated, replaced by a systematic, aggressive campaign of territorial conquest. Because I was confined to the bed for 20 hours a day, I was completely at her mercy. I could hear her moving through the house, the sounds of drawers being emptied, furniture being dragged across the hardwood floors, bags of trash being hauled out to the garage. Every time I asked what she was doing, she would pop her head into the bedroom with that same chilling, beatific smile. Just tidying, dear, just nesting. You rest. Let me handle the burden. But she wasn't handling the burden. She was erasing me. On day 4, I managed to make it to the kitchen for the first time, leading to the horrific discovery of the apothecary jars and the bleach. When I demanded to know why she had completely gutted my pantry, she didn't flinch. Honestly, I don't know how you cooked in this mess, she said, casually wiping down a counter that was already sterile. Everything was so clinical, like a laboratory. A home needs to feel like a home. I bought all these lovely vintage jars at the antique market. Doesn't it feel so much warmer? My spices were organized by use, Eleanor. Where is the turmeric? Where is the smoked paprika? I asked, my voice shaking with suppressed rage and physical pain. Oh, they're in the yellow and red jars, obviously, she laughed, as if I were a slow child. Though I threw away a lot of those weird foreign spices. You know David has a sensitive stomach. We're going to stick to the basics while you heal. Meat and potatoes. Good, honest food. She had thrown away over $400 worth of imported spices, specialized ingredients I used for complex weekend cooking, replacing them with generic salt, pepper, and garlic powder. But the kitchen was only the first casualty. By the end of the first week, she had moved into the children's rooms. Leo and Maya had a highly structured system for their toys and schoolwork, designed to foster independence and executive function. Eleanor dismantled it entirely. She threw away their color-coded storage bins, replacing them with heavy, ornate wooden toy chests that the children couldn't safely open without pinching their fingers. She rearranged their closets, moving their everyday clothes to the top shelves where they couldn't reach them, forcing them to come to her every morning to get dressed, creating a forced dependency that she clearly reveled in. When Maya came into my room crying because she couldn't find her her favorite stuffed rabbit. Eleanor followed closely behind, scooping the child up. Grammy put the old, dirty rabbit in the wash, sweetie. It was filthy. Grammy bought you this beautiful new porcelain doll instead. Isn't she pretty? Maya didn't want the doll. She wanted her rabbit. But Eleanor was already parading her out of the room, loudly proclaiming how much better things were now that Grammy was there to instill some proper standards. The psychological toll was devastating. I was trapped in a body that felt like a cage, inside a house that no longer felt like mine. I tried to call David, but the time difference and his grueling schedule meant we only spoke for a few rushed minutes a day. When I tried to tell him what his mother was doing, he brushed it off with the exhausted impatience of a man dealing with million-dollar concrete whores. She's just trying to help, honey. You know how she is. Just let her have her way in the kitchen for a few weeks. It's not a big deal. I can't deal with drama right now. The sheer stress of this project is killing me. Just say thank you and let it go. He didn't understand. He couldn't see that this wasn't about organization. It was an invasion. It was a hostile takeover wearing the costume of generosity. By the second week, the creeping takeover reached my home office. This was my inner sanctum, the nerve center of my professional life, filled with sensitive documents, complex logistical flowcharts, and high-level corporate data. I had explicitly locked the door before my surgery and told Eleanor under no circumstances was she to enter. But on day 10, I woke up to find the key missing from my nightstand drawer. I forced myself out of bed, strapped on the heavy brace, and dragged my walker down the hall. The office door was wide open. Eleanor was sitting at my custom mahogany desk, humming a cheerful tune, shoving stacks of my meticulously filed tax returns, medical records, and investment portfolios into a series of brightly colored, flimsy cardboard folders she had bought from a discount store. Eleanor, what in God's name are you doing in here? I barked, the pain in my spine spiking dangerously. She looked up, completely unfazed. Oh, good morning. I found the key and thought I'd surprise you. This room was so dreary, and your filing system makes absolutely no sense. I'm color-coding everything. Red for bills, green for money, blue for medical. It's so much simpler. Put those down immediately. Those are highly confidential documents. You have no right to touch them, let alone read them, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, low register. Don't be so dramatic, she scoffed, waving a handful of my 401k statements in the air. I'm your mother-in-law, not a Russian spy. I was just trying to help you get your affairs in order. Honestly, considering how much David makes, I'm surprised you don't have more saved in this account. We really need to have a talk about your budgeting once you're fully recovered. The sheer, unadulterated gall of the woman was breathtaking. She was openly violating my privacy, judging my finances, and destroying a filing system that had taken me years to perfect, all while demanding I thank her for the privilege. I forced her out of the room, locked the door, and hid the key inside my back brace. I spent the next 3 hours sitting in my desk chair, crying silent tears of absolute frustration and agony, trying to sort through the chaos she had created. But the true turning point, the moment the final boundary was crossed and my initial shock crystallized into a cold, diamond-hard resolve for absolute destruction, happened on day 14. I had managed to transition from the walker to a cane, giving me slightly more mobility, though the pain was still a constant grinding static in my brain. I walked into the living room and noticed a strange absence. The corner of the room, next to the fireplace, looked barren. For 5 years, that corner had been occupied by an antique hand-carved cedar chest. It wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was the only physical inheritance I had from my paternal grandmother, a woman who had survived the Blitz in London and immigrated to America with nothing but that chest and the clothes on her back. Inside that chest were my most precious, irreplaceable possessions. My grandmother's handwritten recipe journals, the letters my grandfather sent her from the European theater during the war, the silver rattle I had used as a baby, and a small velvet-lined box containing my late father's military medals. It was my family's entire history, safely stored in a beautiful piece of craftsmanship. The chest was gone. I stood there leaning heavily on the cane, the silence of the house suddenly roaring in my ears. I slowly turned and walked into the kitchen, where Eleanor was aggressively scrubbing a spotless sink. "Where is the cedar chest?" I asked. My voice didn't shake. It was entirely flat, devoid of any emotion, the voice of a professional who has just discovered a critical system failure and is about to initiate emergency shutdown protocols. Eleanor didn't even look up. "Oh, that old bulky thing. I had the junk removal guys take it away this morning. It was taking up so much space, and it really didn't match the modern farmhouse aesthetic I'm trying to bring to the living room. I bought a lovely faux leather ottoman to put there instead. It has storage inside, much more practical." The room went quiet. Nobody moved. The refrigerator hummed. The ticking of the wall clock sounded like hammer strikes. I felt a strange, terrifying calm wash over me, a physical sensation like ice water flooding my veins, momentarily numbing the burning pain in my fused spine. She didn't just move my things. She threw away my history. She threw threw away my grandfather's letters. She threw away my father's medals. She erased my family to make room for a faux leather ottoman. You threw it away, I stated. Not a question, just a confirmation of the data. I donated it, sweetie. Well, the chest itself was too scratched up, so they probably trashed it. But the junk inside, all those dusty old papers and tarnished metal, I just tossed that in the recycling bin. Nobody needs to hold on to old clutter. You have to let go of the past to embrace the future. You'll thank me later. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't lunge at her, though every primitive instinct in my brain was screaming for violence. I knew, with the absolute certainty of a seasoned logistician, that screaming would achieve nothing. Eleanor fed on emotional reactions. They were her fuel, her proof that she was the calm, rational one while you were hysterical. If I yelled, she would play the victim. If I called David, he would tell me to calm down. No, this required a different approach. This required the total, systematic dismantling of Eleanor's life, her reputation, and her perceived reality, executed with the same ruthless efficiency I used to restructure failing corporate supply chains. Okay, I said simply. I turned around and walked back to my bedroom. I locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled out my laptop, and went to work. The counteraction began in absolute secrecy. I did not confront her again. I did not ask her to change anything back. I let her believe she had won, that she had successfully broken my spirit and established total dominance over my home. I smiled when she brought me dry, overcooked chicken. I thanked her when she reorganized my bathroom cabinets, placing my essential toiletries on the highest shelf. I played the role of the defeated, grateful invalid perfectly, while behind the locked door of my bedroom, I was building an arsenal. My first call was to Marcus Vance. Marcus is 60 years old, possesses 30 years of experience in high-stakes family and property law, and charges $800 an hour. He is a shark in a bespoke suit, a man who specializes in the brutal, surgical extraction of toxic family members from the lives of wealthy clients. I explained the situation to him in precise, unemotional detail, treating it exactly like a corporate hostile takeover. I detailed the destruction of property, the invasion of privacy, the unauthorized access to financial documents, and the disposal of the heirloom chest and its contents. What you are describing, Marcus said, his voice a low, gravelly purr through the phone, is technically a civil matter, specifically the tort of conversion. She has assumed ownership and dominion over your property without authorization. However, given that she threw away irreplaceable family heirlooms and accessed confidential financial documents, we can escalate this significantly. We can pursue a civil suit for damages, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and we can immediately draft a cease and desist and an eviction notice, as she has established a form of tenancy by moving in. I don't just want her out, Marcus, I replied, my eyes fixed on the ceiling fan. I want her to pay for every single item she destroyed. I want the exact monetary value of the antique chest, the appraised value of the military medals, the cost of the $400 in spices, the replacement cost of the children's original furniture, and the cost of a professional restoration crew to put my house back exactly the way it was. And I want it done publicly. I want her completely exposed. I like how you think, Marcus chuckled. Start documenting everything. I need receipts. I need photographs. I need an itemized ledger of every single thing she has touched, moved, or destroyed. And if you can get her on tape admitting to the disposal of the items and her motivations, it will make the case bulletproof. I hung up and immediately contacted Elias Thorne, 45 years old, 18 years of experience as a forensic data recovery specialist and private investigator. I needed to know exactly what she had looked at on my computer when she was in the office. Elias walked me through a remote diagnostic protocol, discovering that she hadn't just looked at my files. She had forwarded several of my investment portfolio summaries to her own personal email address. That was the kill shot. She wasn't just snooping. She was gathering financial intelligence, likely to use against me or to manipulate David regarding our estate planning. For the next 7 days, I operated like a ghost in my own home. I bought a discreet voice-activated recording device and kept it in the pocket of my robe. I engaged Eleanor in seemingly benign conversations, subtly guiding her to brag about her improvements. I recorded her admitting to throwing away the cedar chest. I recorded her laughing about tossing the dusty old war medals. I recorded her admitting to emailing my financial documents to herself because she felt David needed to know how much his wife was hiding from him. I photographed every room, documenting the chaotic, nonsensical reorganizations. I spent hours online, tracking down the exact make and model of the antique cedar chest through auction house archives, securing an estimated replacement value of $12,000. I contacted a military historian to appraise the replacement value of my father's specific metals. I contacted the junk removal company she used, paying them a $500 bounty to locate the chest at their processing facility. By a stroke of absolute miraculous luck, the chest had been set aside by a worker who recognized its quality, and the contents were still inside, stuffed into a trash bag waiting to be dumped. I paid the company $2,000 to securely store the chest and its contents until I gave the signal. The trap was set. The rising action culminated in the preparation for the climax. David was scheduled to return from Dubai on a Friday evening, precisely 3 weeks after my surgery. Eleanor, drunk on her perceived power and eager to showcase her total conquest of my domain, decided to throw a welcome home recovery celebration dinner party that Saturday night. She didn't ask me, she informed me. She invited her most influential friends, the president of the local country club, the head of the homeowners association, her pastor, and several wealthy neighbors whom she constantly tried to impress. She wanted an audience. She wanted to stand in the center of my home, serving food on my plates, and accept the adulation of her peers for being the ultimate, self-sacrificing mother and savior of our chaotic household. I told her I thought it was a wonderful idea. I told her I was feeling so much better, and that I would love to come downstairs and join the celebration. She practically preened, clearly envisioning me sitting quietly in a corner, nodding gratefully as she held court. What she didn't know was that I had spent the previous 48 hours orchestrating a logistical masterpiece. I had arranged for Marcus Vance to be present, posing as a colleague of mine from the corporate office. I had hired a high-end, discreet private security firm, 2 large, impeccably dressed men who would wait in an unmarked SUV down the street until called. I had coordinated with a professional home restoration crew, who were on standby to arrive the following morning to completely gut Eleanor's improvements and restore my home to its original state, and I had compiled the dossier. It was a beautiful thing. 50 pages of pristine, color-printed documentation, bound in a professional leather portfolio. It contained the itemized ledger of damages, the printed transcripts of her recorded confessions, the forensic report from Elias Thorne detailing her data theft, the appraisal documents for the heirlooms, and a formal, legally binding cease and desist letter drafted by Marcus, demanding immediate restitution in the amount of $34,620 and demanding she vacate the premises immediately. The night of the dinner party arrived. The house smelled of roasted lamb and heavy perfume. I could hear the clinking of wine glasses and the booming laughter of David, who had arrived the night before, exhausted, jet-lagged, and completely oblivious to the radioactive bomb sitting directly beneath his life. He had briefly looked around the house, frowned at the apothecary jars in the kitchen, but was too tired to argue when Eleanor shoved a plate of food in his hands and told him she had fixed everything. I waited upstairs until the dinner was in full swing, until the guests were seated around my massive mahogany dining table, their plates full, their glasses topped off. I checked my reflection in the mirror. I was wearing a tailored dark navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, my back brace hidden beneath the structured fabric. I looked pale, yes, but I did not look like a victim. I looked like a CEO about to fire an entire department. I picked up the leather dossier and my cane, and I began the slow, painful descent down the stairs. The conversation in the dining room died down as they heard the rhythmic thump-click of my cane on the hardwood. I entered the room. David smiled, standing up. "Honey, you made it down. Look, Mom really outdid herself, didn't she?" Eleanor was sitting at the head of the table, my chair beaming with a predatory radiance. "Oh, there she is, our brave little patient. Come sit, sweetie. I saved you a spot at the end." I did not sit. I walked slowly, deliberately, to the head of the table, stopping just behind Eleanor's chair. I looked around the table, making eye contact with the country club president, the pastor, the wealthy neighbors. I let the silence stretch, letting it become heavy, uncomfortable, oppressive. The smiles began to falter. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice projecting clearly, calmly, with the practiced authority of a woman who regularly commands boardrooms filled with hostile executives. "It is wonderful to see so many people here to celebrate my recovery. However, there has been a slight misunderstanding regarding the nature of this gathering." David frowned, stepping forward. "Hey, what are you talking about? Come sit down. You're straining your back." "I am fine, David," I said, not looking at him, keeping my eyes fixed on Eleanor, whose smile was beginning to look slightly strained. Eleanor has spent the last 3 weeks telling everyone how she has been helping us. She has presented herself as the devoted matriarch, stepping in to manage a chaotic household while I was incapacitated. I think it is important that we clarify exactly what that help entailed. Now, let's not make a fuss. Eleanor laughed nervously, waving a hand dismissively. "You're just tired from the medication, dear. Let's just eat." "Not this time," I said. I opened the leather portfolio. I pulled out the first document and placed it gently on the table in front of her. It was the invoice from the junk removal company. 2 weeks ago, I began, my voice echoing in the dead silent room, Eleanor decided that my family's antique cedar chest did not fit her modern farmhouse aesthetic. Without my permission, she hired a junk removal service to haul it away. Inside that chest were my grandfather's letters from World War II, my father's military medals, and my grandmother's journals. She told me she threw them in the recycling bin because they were clutter. A collective gasp echoed around the table. The pastor looked horrified. David's face drained of all color. "Mom," David whispered, staring at her. "Is that true?" I didn't know," Eleanor stammered, her face flushing a deep, ugly red. "It was just an old, beat-up box. I was trying to make space." "She's exaggerating." "I am not," I said calmly. I pulled out the transcription of the recording and handed a copy to the country club president, who took it with trembling hands. "I have the audio recording of you laughing about throwing away the dusty old war medals. I will gladly play it for the table if you dispute this." Nobody moved. Eleanor stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. "But that is only the beginning," I continued, my voice gaining a relentless, driving rhythm. "In the 3 weeks she has been here, Eleanor has systematically dismantled my home. She threw away $400 worth of imported groceries. She dismantled my children's organizational systems, forcing them to come to her for basic necessities, to create create artificial dependency. She locked my essential post-operative medications in a room I could not physically access, purely to force me to beg her for them. That is a lie, Eleanor shrieked, finally dropping the sweet grandmother facade, her true, vicious nature snapping to the surface. You ungrateful, cold, sterile bitch. I slaved away in this house. I gave up my life to come help you, and this is how you treat me in front of my friends? You didn't come to help, Eleanor. You came to conquer, I replied, utterly unfazed by her outburst. I pulled out the forensic data report, which brings us to the most severe violation. 10 days ago, Eleanor broke into my locked home office, went into my private files, and accessed my highly confidential investment portfolios, and then she emailed them to herself. I dropped the report in front of David. He stared at the IP addresses, the timestamps, the forwarded email logs. He looked at his mother, his expression transforming from shock to a profound, sickening realization. You hacked her computer? David asked, his voice cracking. I didn't hack anything, she wailed, tears of rage springing to her eyes. I was just looking out for you, David. She's hiding money from you. She's controlling everything. I am your mother. I have a right to know what is going on in my son's house. You have no rights here, a new voice spoke up. Marcus Vance stood up from his seat at the far end of the table. He buttoned his suit jacket, projecting an aura of absolute legal menace. My name is Marcus Vance. I am the senior partner at Vance, Sterling & Hayes. I represent the homeowner. Eleanor, what you have committed over the past 3 weeks constitutes civil theft, trespassing, unauthorized access to computer systems, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Eleanor stared at him, her mouth opening and closing silently like a landed fish. The wealthy neighbors were practically shrinking into their chairs, desperate to escape the blast radius of this social nuclear detonation. I have here, Marcus continued, pulling a thick envelope from his breast pocket, a formal cease and desist order, an itemized demand for restitution in the amount of $34,620, and a formal notice of eviction. You have exactly 1 hour to pack your belongings and vacate this property. If you are not gone in 60 minutes, the private security detail waiting outside will physically remove you, and I will contact the police to file formal charges for the theft of the financial documents. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of total, inescapable defeat. Eleanor looked around the table, desperately seeking an ally, seeking someone to defend her, to tell her she was right, that she was the victim. But her friends, the people she had invited to witness her triumph, were staring at her with a mixture of disgust and profound embarrassment. The head of the Homeowners Association quietly stood up, placed his napkin on the table, and walked out of the room without a word. The others quickly followed suit, a silent, hasty exodus, leaving their half-eaten lamb chops behind. Within 2 minutes, the dining room was empty, save for me, David, Marcus, and Eleanor. David, Eleanor sobbed, reaching out a trembling hand toward her son. David, please, you can't let her do this to me. I'm your mother. David looked at her. He looked at the forensic report. He looked at the invoice for the junk removal. He looked at me, standing tall in my brace, my face an impenetrable mask of absolute resolve. For the first time in his life, the fog of his mother's manipulation lifted, and he saw her exactly for what she was. Pack your bags, Mom, David said, his voice dead and hollow. David, I said pack your bags, he roared, the sheer volume of his voice making the crystal glasses on the table vibrate. You threw away her grandfather's letters. You stole her financial records. Get out. Get out of my house right now. Eleanor collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands, sobbing hysterically. But there was no audience left to manipulate. The security team was called in. 2 massive men in dark suits stood silently in the hallway, while Eleanor, weeping and muttering curses under her breath, dragged her suitcases out of the guest room. She walked out the front door, the heavy oak slamming shut behind her with a definitive, satisfying thud. The cascade of consequences was rapid and brutal. The next morning, at 8 a.m. sharp, the professional restoration crew arrived. They worked for 12 hours straight, guided by the photographs I had taken before the surgery. They threw away the apothecary jars, the ceramic roosters, the faux leather ottoman. They restored my spices, remounted the heavy skillets in the bottom drawers, and reassembled the children's rooms exactly as they were. At 2 p.m., a specialized courier arrived, delivering the antique cedar chest, fully intact, the heirloom safe inside. I placed it back in its corner, running my hand over the scarred wood, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over the house. David spent the next 3 days in a state of catatonic shock, apologizing profusely, begging for forgiveness, admitting that he had been blind to his mother's toxicity for his entire life. We had a long, brutal conversation in my restored home office. I laid out the new terms of our marriage. There would be no contact with Eleanor. None. She would not see the twins. She would not be invited to holidays. She was permanently exiled from our lives. If he could not agree to those terms, Marcus Vance would begin drafting divorce papers. David agreed without a moment of hesitation. We entered intense couples counseling with Dr. Eris Thorne, a 54-year-old trauma psychologist with 22 years of experience in narcissistic family dynamics, who helped David deconstruct the decades of gaslighting he had endured. As for Eleanor, the social fallout was absolute. The story of the dinner party spread through her country club and her church like wildfire. The people she had spent years trying to impress now viewed her as a pariah, a woman unhinged enough to steal from her own daughter-in-law and throw away war medals bills. She paid the $34,000 in restitution quietly, desperately trying to avoid a public lawsuit that would further destroy her reputation. She sold her house a year later and moved to Florida, a ghost fading into the background of a retirement community, stripped of her power, her audience, and her family. It has been 2 years since the surgery. My spine has fully fused. I am back at the gym, back at work, back in total control of my life and my logistics. The house is quiet today, the twins are at school, David is at the office, and I am standing in my perfectly optimized kitchen. The spices are arranged alphanumerically. The cast iron skillets are in the bottom drawer. The air smells faintly of lavender and cedar wood. I pour myself a cup of coffee, looking out the window at the morning sun hitting the meticulously manicured lawn. The peace is profound, hard-won, and absolute. I think about Eleanor sometimes, about the chaos she tried to inflict, the control she tried to steal under the guise of maternal care. She meant well. I keep telling myself that. She meant well, and she moved everything, so I moved her entirely out of my life.